Hello everyone and welcome to this video about descent planning. I was speaking to a controller and got an idea about this video. A lot of people have problems with descent planning, and believe me, also pilots in real life, they struggle with this. It takes quite a long time to master descent planning. So in this video I will give you some tips and some rule of thumbs that you can use in order to calculate and set up for a nice approach. And we will use the charts from Luftfartsverket. We'll fly into Arlanda. A lot of people are going there in the flight simulator. First of all, we'll cover how to set up and plan your approach properly. That's not the easiest thing always to read all the charts, so we'll try to cover a little bit about that. Also, we will look on continuous descent approaches or operations. A lot of airports, they have something called CDA, or as I told, continuous descent approach, which means that you should not level off at a certain or under a certain altitude. Arlanda, for example, they have below flight level 100, where they want you to continue the descent and they don't want you to level off. This is because they want to keep the noise down as much as possible, because there are a lot of built-up areas around or south of the airport at least. So that's the thought about that. We will also cover some simple descent calculations, how to calculate in your head. Not only relying on the FMC, because it can sometimes mess things up. We'll also be looking at shortcuts from A to C, vectors, and high energy approach mitigation. High energy is when you have high altitude, you're high on speed, and you have not enough distance to slow down. It's the speed restrictions and how to keep them. So, for example, if you're descending, you're perfectly on the path, and let's turn back a little bit. You're perfectly on the path, and the ATC tells you that they want you to fly 230 knots, and you're at 250. And then also we'll be looking at some manual modes, because in the approach phase you will be using different modes usually to be where you want to be with the right speed at the right altitude. So let's start to have a look at approach charts. And as I told you before, Arlanda and many other airports, they have something called continuous descent approach, or CDA. It can also be CDO for operations. So in the general section, we can read here that the pilots are requested to plan their descent so as to perform a continuous descent approach from at least flight level 100. Specified minimum level at waypoints must be adhered to unless specifically cancelled by ATC. So this means that as long as you're flying on the star, it means that you have to comply with them, and you have to make sure that all of these restrictions are in the FMC. So this is what you're doing when you're planning your descent. Before you start a descent, you're checking this in the FMC so everything is correct. But for example, if ATC gives you vectors, if they guide you away from the star, then those restrictions do not longer apply to you. So the ATC will tell you to fly at a certain speed and a certain heading, and they will tell you when to descend, and so on. It can be a little bit more tricky because you're not going on the path. It will be more difficult to calculate your descent, and that's when you will need to use some other functions in the FMC, or as always, you should always calculate in your head as well. So we'll go through that rule of thumb. As an example, we will fly the Nilug 2 Papa arrival into Arlanda. So from Nilug, it's very difficult to see. I think most of you use maybe some other types of charts. These are the real ones from Luftfartsverket in Sweden. They are not so good, as you can see. but we'll be using them just for demonstration purposes. So from Nilug, the star starts from Nilug. It's called Nilug to Papa, which you can see here. The line here, it means that you should be below flight level 170. So at Nilug, you should be below flight level 170. Okay, so we continue on 0 to 1 degrees for 18.9 miles to Sierra Alpha 630. There's no restriction at that point. And then we continue from Sierra Alpha 630 towards Tebby. Next we go 005 degrees towards Erken. This is an NDB, and also the initial approach fix. So as you can see, the airport is here where the mouse is, and Erken, which is the initial approach fix, is where the star basically ends. So either you have a transition, but in Arlanda they use vectors. They will vector you onto the final approach, the ILS or whatever you will be flying. So basically the only restriction we have, this is a very simple star, is at Nilug. It's below flight level 170. And the next chart, which comes after the star, is the ILS. In this case, we will be flying an ILS approach into runway 19er left. So the important things to note here are that we have to fly minimum 160 knots until we're passing Uniform Sierra Alpha DME 4.0. So when you're on the ILS, you will see on the PFD, let me show you on the PFD, you will see the DME here. So until you have passed 4 miles on the ILS, you have to keep 160 knots at least. And also another important thing, you can also see it in the FMC. You will double check this, or we will do it. I will show you how to check it. The platform altitude, this is called the platform altitude, is where you should intercept the ILS. Also a quick explanation of the rule of thumb that you can use for your descent calculations. For example, if you want to descend 10,000 feet, you multiply 10,000, or to make it easier, you multiply 10 with 3, which is 30. And that means that you need 30 miles to descend 10,000 feet. If you have less than 30 miles, it means that you're high. If you have more, it means that you're low. So that's a very simple idea and a calculation that you can make and should make quite often when you're descending. To complement that calculation, we can use the ground speed, which is in this case around 400 knots. We divide that by 2. That's 200 knots. The only thing you need to do is 400 divided by 2. That's 200. And then you just add zeros to that. So 2,000 feet per minute. And you need 30 miles to descend 10,000 feet. Okay, so the first step in your planning phase is to check the FMC so that you have all the restrictions, both altitude and speed, in the computer. So you need a chart and you need the FMC. So as we said before, at Nilug we should be below flight level 170. We checked the FMC, we have Nilug, and it says here flight level 170 or below. If you don't have this altitude, what you can do is that you simply press the slash, because you want to change the values after the slash. This is the speed, this is the altitude, so you put slash 170 or below. If you want to be above, you just change it to A, or if you want to be at the altitude, which you can have on some stars, you just put 170 and it will calculate so that you will be at flight level 170 at that point. It's quite good, at least we use it at the initial approach fix, is that you should fly 220 knots or below at the initial approach fix. This is to mitigate high-speed approaches. So we can also put in 220 knots or below at Erken, because that is our initial approach fix. Next thing is, if we go back to the chart at Erken, you see that it ends, and also we have a discontinuity in the FMC. So we can just check here, we see there's no transition. So as long as we keep that in mind, that Erken is our clearance limit, which means that we cannot continue towards the runway if we are not cleared to do it. So before we reach Erken, if we haven't received any instructions, we have to ask what ATC wants us to do. But in this case, we can just connect the centerfix 19 left with Erken. Sometimes you get the same platform altitude as you have on the centerfix, and as you can see, it's 2 miles from between these points, and we don't want to level off. So what we can do in order to keep a continuous descent is that we can put in 2500 or above at the centerfix. Another way to make the VNAV path more accurate is to put in some winds on the descent forecast page. So if you go to the descent, you start with putting in 250 below flight level 100, and you go to the forecasts. So on this page you can set the transition level, as you probably already know, so we can just change it to 60. The QNH Arlanda is, I'm just using the standard weather now, so we'll just put in that one. And to make the VNAV path more accurate, you can put in some winds on different altitudes or flight levels, and that's very, very convenient, because if you have a lot of tailwind, you need to start to descend a bit earlier, and if you have headwind, you can start to descend later, and this is not very easy to calculate in your head. So it's actually very convenient to have these winds in there. So usually what you're doing, what some companies are doing in real life, is that you put in flight level 310, you put in flight level 200 and flight level 100. And then you have a look at your the P-log that you have either from, I don't know, maybe you have SimBrief, maybe PFPX, or some other program. Anyways, you should have some descent winds. So if you look at the end, usually it's in the end of the P-log, you can see the winds. So just for demonstration, I can show you how to put in, let's say, because I'm using just standard weather, we don't have any winds actually, so I can just show you how to put in, very simple. So we just put in some interesting winds here. Yeah, okay. So if the wind is a lot, then as you can understand, it will make a huge impact on your profile. So this is a very important and simple way to correct your VNAV path for that. And also another function is if you know that there will be icing conditions and you need to use engine anti-ice during the descent, you can also mitigate the high speed for by entering the values here. When you turn on the engine anti-ice, the flight idle is actually going up a bit, so it will be more difficult to descend, because you will have a little bit higher N1 for the engines to produce enough of bleed air to de-ice your engines, basically. So what you can do, let's say we have broken at 1000 feet, so maybe we'll need anti-ice at from 5000 feet. So we just put in thermal anti-ice on at 5000 feet, and maybe we'll turn it off close to the ground, so maybe we don't need to put in any off level there. All you do is execute that, and now you have a more accurate VNAV path. Another thing to note when you plan the descent and when you're setting up everything, well, it's a good idea. You don't have to, but it's a very good idea to put in the runway in the fix page, and you put also some rings. So this is a 10-mile ring, this is a 4-mile ring, and the other one is for your top of descent. So if you see here, the ring is 108 miles, 108. You have that ring here. So when you get to this point, you should start a descent somewhere close to this ring. You get this ring by multiplying your cruise level with 3. So it's the same as the descent calculation. You take 36 times 3. Another reason why we put in the 10 and 4 mile rings, that is that at 10 miles you should have at least flaps 1, and you should also fly at that speed. Otherwise there's a big risk of a high energy approach where you have too high speed and you cannot slow down in time. So flaps 1 before 10 miles, and at glide slope capture you should have already flaps 5. And the 4 mile ring, remember, at 4 miles we can start to slow down from 160 knots, and in some companies they also select gear down at 4 miles. So this is called a low drag approach. If the ATC keeps you high and you don't get to descend when you want, it happens quite often in real life as well, then you have to correct the path in some way. So I will press altitude hold. So we will keep the altitude, or flight level 360 at the moment, and we will overfly the top of descent. You see here also it's 6 miles left, so we'll just wait. Now we're 3,500 feet above the path. So what we want to do now, we are clear down to flight level 200. So we set 200 here. Okay, I will, just for demonstration, I will press VNAV, and it goes into VNAV speed automatically, which is about the same as as level change, and it will retard the thrust. It will keep the speed now. But if we or you cannot do it in PMG. In some versions you can change between VNAV path and VNAV speed on the descent page, but here obviously you cannot. So now in order to get back to the path, we want to fly faster. So what we can do is we can go, either we can press speed intervent and we can increase the speed like that, or we can use level change. It's the same thing basically, but in level change it will not keep the restrictions. It will only level off when you reach the flight level or altitude set on the MCP. So just for demonstration, we can use VNAV and speed intervent, and we can start to increase the speed, and it will increase the rate of descent. And you should, yeah, as you can see, we are catching up on the path. If you want to correct faster, actually now it's going pretty well here. If you want to correct more, you can use some speed brakes as well. Otherwise you can just keep increasing the speed, and you will eventually pick up the path again. Also, another thing that you can do, or should do actually, to make it more accurate, is that if you go to the descent page, which you should have up when you're descending, you can change the target speed to 290 knots. So let's do that. We put in 290 knots, we execute that, and it will calculate the path. And you see, whoa, now we're very low. We're 1,700 feet below the path, which means that it has recalculated the path for the new speed that we select. So let's try 280 knots. We put that in, target speed, we execute that, and it calculates again. Oh, you see now, it's perfectly. So what we do now is we just press speed intervent, it goes back to VNAV path, and voila, we're on the path again. The green arc, I think most of you know it already. It's where it calculates where you will level off if you keep the same rate of descent. But as you get lower, then it means that the air density will increase, and your rate of descent will also change if you want to stay on the path, because your speed will also decrease. So it means that you will descend slightly slower. Get another descent clearance to flight level 80. Go back to VNAV, and because we changed the speed before, it will keep 280 knots and calculate the VNAV path after that until we reach flight level 100, because then it knows that it needs to decelerate the speed to 250 or below. Okay, we can use the rule of thumb now, the descent calculation. So we're at about 14,000 feet, so you take 14 times 3, which is 42. You add 5, because you want to reduce the speed as well. So 47. You need 47 miles until touchdown in order to get down. And we have 76, and you can also see that we're very low here. So you can easily see with this calculation that you are not on path, you are below it. If you want to correct the path, if you're low, if you stay in VNAV path, it will just keep approximately 1,000 feet per minute, and you will slowly catch up with the path. This is the best way of catching up if you're really low. Okay, we'll cover also some other good rule of thumbs when you're planning the descent. We're approaching Arlanda now. We're getting closer to Täby and then Erken, and then we'll get vectors to final. So at 35 miles from touchdown, which you can see if you take a look on the progress page, this is the track miles, 52 miles left to the touchdown. At 35 miles we should be at flight level 100 and 250 knots. When we have 20 track miles from touchdown, we should be at approximately 5,000 feet above ground level and approaching the VNAV decel points, or we should at least consider reducing the speed at 20 miles from 250 knots to the up speed, because we want to get some flaps out as well. And when we have 15 track miles from touchdown, we should be at approximately 4,000 feet above the ground. We should also be approaching the up speed, where we should select flaps 1. When we are passing the 10 miles, a good rule is 3, 2, 1. That means we need to be at 3,000 feet, around 200 knots, and we need flaps 1. So 3, 2, 1. Another thing that can happen is that ATC gives you a speed. So now we are below flight level 100, we are flying at 250. We don't have any restrictions here, but ATC tells you to fly at 230 knots. So what do? Well, we go to the descent page. If not, you're not already there, you put in 230 knots and we put it as a target speed. So we put it as a target speed. I can bring it up to show you 230 target speed. You just click there and you execute. The speed will jump down and the path will recalculate for the new speed. It's going quite slow, and the ATC wants us to fly exact 230 knots, so we extend the speed brake. Can continue to descend to platform altitude. Another way of changing your speed while you are in the VNAV path. So we get 230 knots from ATC. What you can do is you press on speed intervent, bring up or open up the speed window, you bring back the speed to 230. The FMC is still calculating your speed for 250 knots, so this path will be for 250 knots, but you manually change the speed to 230. And of course you have to make sure that we are flying that speed as well if the ATC gives you. Alright, so we're getting closer to the runway. We are a little bit low, as you can see. The best way to correct for that, you can go to VS and you can reduce your VS to minus 300. I wouldn't recommend to go below minus 300 because we want to do this continuous descent operations now. So there are basically two good ways to do that. We're catching up with the path here. It's time to go back to VNAV. Go back to path. It follows the path and retards the throttle. So let me bring up the navigation display a little bit. Before I created a point, it's 5 miles before Erken, and we put the hard altitude there to mitigate the high energy approach. So the restriction here is 3,900. We expect to get the vectors onto final, or at least onto base somewhere here. So we'll see what happens. If the ATC gives us direct, then we should be good to go. We're at about 5,000 feet, And if we take a look at the progress page, we have 31 miles. 5 times 3, it's 15 miles, and we have 31. That's because we have the entire route, but if we connect Erken 01, the point that we created with Centrifix, then we will be about 15 miles as well. So it looks fine at the moment. And it's very important to fly the correct speed and be at the correct altitude, because it will be much easier for the ATC, the controllers, to sequence you into the right position between the other aircrafts that also wants to land. Okay, so now the ATC wants us to go direct to Charlie India 19er left, so they give us a heading of, let's say, about 270. Heading select. Okay, so now we are in heading select mode. We're still in VNAV. The VNAV is keeping the altitude, but we are going away from the LNAV, the path that we want to fly. So what we can do is that we can connect the Centrifix and execute. And because we mitigated the high approach there, we are still on the path, which is really good. And we have good speed now. You can zoom in a little bit so you can see better. 18 miles, okay, so we can start to retract or retard the speed a little bit, and soon we'll also get some flaps out. And remember, at 15 miles, which should be approximately at 4,000 feet, we are slightly below that. And the reason why we're hardly descending is because I went into the level change, so it pitches only for the speed now, and it disregards the path. So you have to keep an eye on the path now, and also on the glide slope. So you see here we are below the glide path, so that means we can go to vertical speed. We can select -300, and we can also get some flaps out. So call for flaps 1. Can reduce the speed even more. Now ATC wants us to fly to or fly a heading of 230 degrees. We can update again to check the path. As you can see now, we don't want to level off. We are keeping a rate of descent of at least -300 feet per minute, and we are catching up on the glide slope. The speed is already under control. We have correct sensing. We can arm the approach because we are also cleared the ILS approach. And we can call for flaps 5. Because on the glide slope we want flaps 5 and approximately at the correct speed as well. Okay, we have the localizer. We put the final approach track. And there's the glide slope. We can set the missed approach altitude. And we are still descending. We are correct on path with the correct speed. And we don't have any high energy situation or any weird configuration. So this is perfect. So what I did there, when I saw that we were below the glide slope, even though the path showed us to be exactly on, then you can just go over to vertical speed. You select a lower descent rate until you catch up with the path, and then when you have catched up, you can either increase the rate of descent depending on your position, and then you should be able to capture the glide slope perfectly. And there's another thing I want to show you as well. Some airports, they use something called point merge, which are basically that you have a lot of waypoints that goes out on the downwind. If you check my mouse, they go out on the downwind. Then you turn base somewhere, and then you go on to the final. But usually, if you don't have a lot of traffic in the area, then usually you will get a shortcut. And I just created a point here. It's called Erken 001, and it's 5 miles before Erken. And we can expect to turn final already here, so we don't need to go all the way to Erken. And if we do this, well, obviously we will get less track miles and we will be high. So I will now show you how to plan for that and to mitigate the high energy approach. So we will unpause. I'll just climb up a little bit to 7.0 just to demonstrate. So yeah, here's the point, and we want to go directly to the center fix from that point. So we press on the center fix, we put it below Erken 01, and we don't execute because we just want to see what altitude the FMC is calculating. So it wants us to be at 3,938 feet in order to maintain a good path. For example, if you have speed restriction or altitude restriction here, you can delete it and then it will recalculate and you will get the altitude which you should be on. Hopefully you understand what I mean with that. So what we can do now is we remember 39 and we press erase and we put in 3,900 at this point. You see here it wants to be at flight level 5.8 or 5,800 feet if we go to Erken, but we don't want to go to Erken. We expect to get a shortcut. So what we do is we press on Erken, we change that to a hard altitude and we press execute. And now it will recalculate, and even though you have to fly the entire route, you will still have a continuous descent. You see here, Erken 3,500 and then 2,500. So it means that we can safely go from this point here directly to the center fix without getting high on the profile. I will show you fast also how you can create waypoints if you want to build your own approach or if you want to correct something. So what you do is you take a waypoint or VR or NDB or whatever you want. For example, we'll use Sealand. You get it in the scratch pad. Here is Sealand on the ND. You check for example in what direction you want to create the waypoint. As you see, I have already created a waypoint here. It's called Sealand 02 and I put just 090, that's the radial, slash the distance. So I put in 50, that's the distance, and then you put it here. So let's create another one. Sealand, for example 060 and slash distance, let's say 35 miles from Sealand. We press on Sealand and you see the new waypoint has been created. So we just connect these and now you can see the new route will be to Sealand 02, then Sealand 03, and then we come to Sealand. This is another situation and another star. We will try the Sealand 5 Papa arrival, and I will show you how to correct for the high energy approach that can occur on this particular star. So we go to legs page. I will show you how it looks like. So you arrive at Sealand, need to be below flight level 150, and then it's Sierra Alpha 570, Tebby, we turn right to Erken and then vectors to final. So very often you get a direct after Sealand to Erken, and this creates a very big shortcut and a big reduction in track miles, as you can see. So first of all, I will show you how to prepare for it, and secondly I will show you how to correct if you end up being high. Hopefully everything is set up now. So we have the star now in the FMC. We have Sealand, Sierra Alpha, and all the points in here and all the restrictions. So we expect to go direct to Erken after Sealand. So we move Erken and put it below Sealand. We need to delete the altitude restriction at Sealand, and it will recalculate, and it wants us to be at flight level 113 at Sealand, and the restriction was below 150. So we can easily, if we delete that and we change it to flight level 110 at Sealand, then we have already we will be 4,000 feet below this, And if we get a direct, then we will be at a very much like in a better position to go direct to that point. So we change that, execute it. Alright, so I changed back to flight level 150 at Sealand or below, just to show you how to correct in case you don't anticipate the shortcut and you have to correct the VNav path manually. So we'll soon arrive at Sealand here. We'll clear down to flight level 100 and we can prepare. We will get a direct to Erken after Sealand. Okay, so now in this situation we are more or less on the path. We are at Sealand at flight level 152 approximately. We execute the shortcuts and now you can see we are very high. So what we do, we have been cleared to flight level 100. We go to level change. We increase the speed because we are still below flight level 100 and we extend the speed brake. We're turning towards Erken and we're catching up with the path, but as you can see we are very high because this is a very big shortcut. We can increase the speed even more because we're still above flight level 100, but keep in mind we have to reduce to 250 below. So let's not increase too much. Okay, so here we go back to 250 knots. We'll keep the speed brake extended, of course. We can help it up out a little bit. Even the real plane is a bit slow to correct, so we can go over to VS for a short time. We can select a very low rate of descent. It will more rapidly correct the vertical speed until we have slowed down. Then we will go over to level change again. 265 knots. Okay, we go back to level change. It will start to pitch again for the speed and we will descend faster. Okay, now so 10,000 feet, we have about 37 track miles there, and as I said before in the video, you should be at approximately flight level 100 at 35 miles. And you can also see here we'll be at altitude 2500 at the green arc. So actually what we can do now, we can retract the speed brake, and the path here, it shows very strangely that we are very high, but in fact we are not that high. I don't know, it's probably some bug in the PMDG. So we will try to do this by the rule of thumb. So we can totally disregard this, and we can do this by just flying with the things that we have learned. We are checking again. 8 times 3 is 24, and we need approximately 5 miles to slow down. So that's 29 miles. We have 30 miles, so it looks good. 7 times 3, that's 21, plus 5, 26. We need 26 miles, we have 27, means that we are on path. We can totally disregard this. Also, we want to be at 220 knots at Erken, because the initial approach fix. We need to slow down 30 knots, we need 3 miles to do that. So, approximately 4 now. Yeah, so let's start to slow down. 220 knots. We're still in level change. The aircraft is pitching for speed. We'll pitch up, we'll reduce the speed. And remember, at 20 miles, which should be at approximately 5,000 feet. So we are at 220 knots. the rate of descent will increase. We're turning in towards... actually here you should get vectors, so let's say that we have got fly heading 240, we go to heading select. Okay, now I'm looking at the glide slope. We are below it, so I retracted the speed brake. We are at 5,000 feet at 20 miles, so this is very good. We have 220 knots. And now I'm in, I've been in level change all the time, but if you want you can go over to vertical speed and you can adjust to example 800. You can see the green arc here. Okay, at 15 miles we can start to slow down more and select some flaps. Can reduce even more. Okay, start to reduce speed. And we can call for flaps 1. And we're matching the bug. We clear the ILS, so we arm approach. Can increase a little bit to minus 700. Okay, this is a bit steep approach, so we can just, or angle, so we can fly 220 until captured. And I'm watching also the green arc here. We want to be at 2,500 at the final approach fix. And we don't want to level off, so I want to make sure that green arc is beyond that point. 10 mile ring, we are at approximately 3,000 feet. We are below 200 knots and we have flaps 1. We can call for flaps 5. And localizer glide slope captured, heading 185, boost approach altitude 1,500 is set. Use speed brake, use level change or VNAV speed, whatever you prefer. In some cases you can also go to vertical speed, and don't be afraid to correct early. The earlier you correct, the less troubles you will have.